to Brighter Morning with Bo, and I am Bo Tiwari. We're so glad to have you on MCTV, Multicultural TV, a new 97.5 FM radio, Hot Like Pepper Radio, Multicultural Radio. Every morning we are here with Brighter Morning with Bo from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., Monday through Friday. And we have some wonderful guests lined up every morning for you. This morning, our two guests are Professor Avinash Persaud, who was born in Barbados. His parents are Guyanese. He spent some time in Jamaica. As a boy, he has lived in England for some of his life, and very, very alert and aware of financial and economic issues. And he is now advisor to the Prime Minister of Barbados on financial and investment matters. And our second guest is Dr. Vishy Bihari, and he is the president of the Medical Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And we will talk to him about what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago with regard to the management of COVID health from a private practitioner's point of view, and from the Medical Association of Trinidad and Tobago's point of view, and how we are also managing the vaccination drive. So we will do that this morning. We're waiting to get Professor Persaud on the line. But before we go on, we will mention a few things. I don't know if you are aware, many of you might have friends or relatives in New York City and in New Jersey, and Hurricane Ida, which has wreaked havoc in New Orleans and Mississippi and places in the southern part of the United States, has now unleashed overnight tremendous rainfall in New York and New Jersey. And the end result of that is that we had flooding of subways, we had cars that could not drive, there were a number of deaths, people were calling 911 like crazy. Police tried their best to help, but they could not help everybody. And there, as I said, there were a few casualties, I think unexpectedly, in places like New Jersey and New York City. So that's one thing that we need to take note of. You might be interested. You know, I normally write for The Guardian on Thursdays on page 12, the editorial page. And you might be interested in my article this morning, which is, the headline of which is, "Will Redemption Come for Joe Biden?" And it really talks about the fact that nobody was against the pullout of the Americans from Afghanistan. Everybody thought the war was too long and too wasteful. But I think people are quite upset about the manner in which the exit was handled. So the question I ask is, will Mr. Biden, President Biden, be able to redeem himself as President of the United States? He is young in the presidency. It is less than a year since he took over the presidency. So he has approximately 3 1/3 years to go before the next election. But I think this has been a bitter pill to swallow for the United States of America. They lost some Marines, they lost soldiers. They are leaving behind a lot of people who helped them. You have a refugee situation in there. The Taliban is in charge. You have Al-Qaeda present, but largely invisible up to now, but you certainly have ISIS-K doing a lot of damage. So we will see what will happen in that part of the world. And yesterday, I was telling you that what happens in Afghanistan matters in Trinidad and Tobago. It matters in the Western Hemisphere. And ironically, last night, I saw a release on a news item from Bloomberg News, which reports on business developments. And there is a report of a huge pending investment in Venezuela in the oil sector, in the energy sector, by China National Investment Corps. So what is the significance of that? The significance of that, the connection with Afghanistan is very clear. The U.S. has pulled out of Afghanistan. The Chinese have a border with Afghanistan, and they are ever present. Pakistan has a border with Afghanistan, and they are not going anywhere. India has since initiated talks with the Taliban directly, officially, to look after their citizens, because India has a border with Russia, first of all, and they have a border with Pakistan, and they have a border with China. So the geopolitics there is kind of complexly emerging. But China is a player in the world, and in a situation in which it is now rising as a power in relation to the Taliban emergence in Afghanistan. China is also present in this part of the world, and it is unlikely that the U.S. is going to intervene in Venezuela. Maduro government is making reforms in their investment framework in Venezuela, and the Chinese are willing and able and poised to make investments of a significant kind in the Western Hemisphere, and it is not going to shy away from Venezuela, because eventually that country, some kind of arrangement is going to have to be made to resolve the issues in Venezuela that are leading to the second largest migration problem, refugee and displacement problem, asylum seeking problem in the entire world, and the largest one in this hemisphere. So when you see things happening elsewhere, you must not think that it's far away and it's not going to affect us. Everything is connected in the world system, and you never know what is going to happen somewhere that is going to trigger psychologically the need for engagement elsewhere. So let us see if we have Professor Persaud on the line. Is he on the line now? Are we getting him? Okay, we try to get Professor Persaud, and we will engage him shortly. Before we go to regional and international issues with him, because, you know, he's very well versed in finance and investment issues, and he is very, very steeped in CARICOM issues. He just did a report for CARICOM, actually. And he is very, very sanguine about what's happening in the world system and where the Caribbean starts. So we will engage that. But before we go there, remember we are having a cabinet retreat in Trinidad and Tobago. Prime Minister Rowley has taken his entire cabinet to Tobago, and yesterday they started a retreat to discuss the way forward. You have the budget pending. We don't know what date yet, but most likely sometime in October. So they're going to have some weeks in September to be able to put into practice whatever they discuss. I had a very interesting discussion with Professor Patrick Watson yesterday, He's an econometrician. He is very good. He used to be head of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Research. When we talked about what the cabinet might do in the retreat, he mentioned 4 things, which I want to share with you again. I shared them yesterday, but it's important to remember. We talked about the $644 million that the IMF made available to Trinidad and Tobago, based on Trinidad and Tobago's membership and contribution to the IMF. And $644 million is almost equivalent to the 5 billion TT dollars that we spent on COVID, according to the words of the Minister of Finance. Let's say it's a little less, 4.5 billion TT dollars, but it's almost $5 billion. So I asked Professor Watson, what should we do with this? And he said 4 things. He said the first thing we should not do is to try to cover the deficit with it. He said because that would be a waste of money in the sense that we would simply be, he didn't use those words, I'm making an interpretation. He said that basically we'd be plugging a hole with available funding that we have, which we could better use. The second thing he said was that he agreed with the Prime Minister's position that we should use the money to grow exports, because given the reduction in prices and reduction in production in the energy sector and the loss of revenues and taxes from that sector, we should try to grow exports, because you remember Professor Watson had said the single biggest problem for us was how to earn foreign exchange. But he said together with the growing of exports, we should try to find a way of fast-tracking some innovation, that the country was in need of innovation and we should treat that as a priority and try to get that going. So he didn't specifically say how, but it is something to think about, and there are ways and means of doing this. The third thing he said was that we should take some longer term, we should make some longer term interventions. He was calling on the government not just not to throw the money in the deficit, not just to back exports and to fast-track innovation, but he was saying we should make some longer-term interventions which can be carried on from government to government. That is to say, no matter which government is in power, that would address the long-term issue of sustainable development for Trinidad and Tobago. And the fourth thing he said was that we should try to attract some investments and to facilitate some investment to fast-track the diversification process linked to our export drive. And those were the 4 things that he said. Don't put money in the deficit, grow exports and fast-track innovation, make longer-term interventions that can take us on the path to sustainable development, and facilitate and attract investments to fast-track diversification. I think there is some good advice there. We will see what the government will come up with after the retreat. We hope to hear from them. Is Professor Persaud there? All right, let's try and talk with him. Good morning, Professor Persaud. How are you?
Good morning, Bo. I'm very well. How are you?
Let's take his volume up so we can hear him better.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better. Very good. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a long time. Many years ago, I saw you in Trinidad. And I know that you are all over the Caribbean and that you are very, very concerned about the Caribbean in the world.
Yes.
Now, Professor Persaud, you have many areas of expertise, but I think one of the areas that you are very well known for and regarded as one of the shining light, so to speak, in terms of knowledge of this area is in the financial area. And I think your perspective on that is very global. You understand the system well, you track the system, you try to keep in touch with what is happening. So I want to start with that. And I want to ask you, given the COVID relief efforts that we have seen all over the world, trillions of dollars in the United States, significant amounts of pounds in the UK, in Germany, the same thing, all over the world in the big countries. What do you think is likely to be the impact of that globally? Is there anything that we should worry about given these kinds of interventions in this COVID relief effort to sustain their economies and society?
Well, I think there are two things to say. Firstly, you're quite right. There's been a huge relief effort. It has been estimated by the International Monetary Fund that globally about $20 trillion has been spent. 20 trillion US dollars. 20 trillion is that kind of number that people find it hard to understand in their head. It's a big number. It's been bigger than any other relief effort in our history. Bigger than during the global financial crisis of the last decade. Bigger than anything before. And about 19 of that 20 has been spent by the rich countries. So one of the things that it comes across very clearly is that developing countries have been constrained from spending what they would otherwise have spent if they didn't have their fiscal constraints, the size of their deficits and their debts, and the inability for them to borrow money inexpensively. So that is a real problem. We need more access as a region, as developing countries as a whole, to more concessionary finance, especially when we're trying to battle a global pandemic or climate change, things which are not caused by the region but hit the region hard. I think that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing to say is that there are a lot of useful similarities between COVID and a world war. This has been a huge impact on everyone, individuals, families, communities, countries, nations, and regions. And it's like World War I, World War II. And I think one of the things we should be concerned about is that after both of those wars, there was tremendous price pressure. And I think people are already feeling that. Shortage of things, prices going up, and so we will need to manage not only the shortage of money, the need to get money to vulnerable people who may have lost their jobs, the need to sustain people in the workforce, but also how do we limit the price pressures that are coming. It was one of the first exercises in national price control after World War II that I actually think, and this is an uncommon view amongst economists as a whole, that temporary price freezes and price controls may be necessary as we come out of this recovery. Not very long. The longer they last, the more people find ingenious ways to get around them and they start to fail. But maybe a 12 or 18-month price freeze maybe is what we need to stabilize the ground as we try to recover.
Okay, you think you talk about the price pressure due to shortages. You talked about the fact that 19 trillion out of 20 have been disbursed in the industrialized countries. The shortage of financing in the developing world. You think that there is any prospect of a global financial crisis of any kind because of this and because of the convergence of all of these issues, as you yourself have indicated, in a kind of post-war rehabilitation setting, is there a danger to the global financial system itself?
There is a danger. The danger will materialize if something happens which has not happened, which is that US interest rates start to rise. So the world is now heavily indebted. The amount of debts are way over the size of our national income. They are sustainable, those debts, if the servicing of those debts, the interest rates you have to pay every year,
Yes,
remains
yes,
very low. Now, we
yes.
know that Japan, for example, has a debt level that is around 225%, so more than twice its national income. But they're able to support that without any problem because their interest rates are 1% or less. So we need to, if US interest rates start to rise and investors all over the world can make a decent return by being in the safest asset, US government paper, treasuries they're called, then they will withdraw their money from emerging markets and from companies and go into that safe paper. And that will trigger the biggest financial crisis we've ever seen. But so far, interest rates have remained very, very low, and the US seems quite addicted to these very low interest rates. So there is a significant risk, but it's not inevitable. One of the things that developing countries need to do, and we have for the first time ever a Caribbean person chairing the Development Committee. The Development Committee is a joint committee between the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank of all of the members. And they sit there and they talk about development because the IMF is not really about development, it's about rescuing countries in a financial bind. And so they've decided that they need to have a discussion about development that is global. And Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, chairs the Development Committee for the next 12 months. And in that committee, one of the things they've been pushing for is more concessionary money, very low interest rates money. The other thing that we're pushing is something that is a bit of a Barbadian innovation to some extent, is something called natural disaster clauses. So when Barbados restructured its debt in 2018, they put in all the new debt, and this is something you can only do when you've restructured your debt, because you can put it in all of your new debt, a clause which says that if there's a natural disaster, we do not need to pay interest or repay debt for 2 years. And that 2 years of interest and debt repayment is then added on to the end of the debt agreement. Let's say you have a 10-year borrowing. In the middle of that borrowing, you had an earthquake, a hurricane, a pandemic. For 2 years, you get 2 years of breathing space, allowing you to take those resources you would have spent on servicing debt to rescue people and humanity and jobs and all those things. And then the debt becomes a 12-year debt and you pay back in the last 2 years. And that would have injected $1 trillion into developing countries if everyone had it. And we're recommending that everyone now issues natural disaster clauses in their debts. And the rich countries should start off to set a good example, even though they don't really need it.
Okay, and this is under discussion, but not formalized, not finalized. Is that correct?
So some countries have started. Barbados is now the world's largest issuer of sovereign bonds with natural disaster clauses. That's quite significant, given that we're one of the tiniest countries in the world.
Yes.
So we were able to do that because it was an innovative and bold stance. Grenada has also done that. So there are about 2 Caribbean countries as an example of where the Caribbean is leading the world with a financial innovation in our debt. Now, we need to make it more common, because the more people think, oh, your debt's a bit funny, your debt's got a weird clause on it, it may make people hesitant to lend to us. And so one of the ways of making it common is that everyone says, oh, we'll all issue the debt, so that
Yes.
this clause is no
So it
longer
becomes a
uncommon.
norm. Yes.
Exactly. So we're trying to normalize it. We haven't normalized it, but there's a lot of support for the idea.
I want to ask you some questions about Barbados and the CARICOM region. But before I get there, the IMF, you mentioned the IMF. The IMF had made two major interventions. One has been in relation to the, what do you call it? Rapid credit facility, where very relatively early in COVID, before a year was over, they intervened and made very low-cost finance available to developing countries. And they targeted some of the poorest countries. Recently, they have created the condition for all member countries where they can make significant drawdowns of money that is at no cost whatsoever to the country. They are really a gift, and there are also no conditionality. Now, in a sense, that offsets, to some extent, the guilt that might have emerged from pouring $19 trillion into the industrialized world.
Well, not really, though.
Well,
I'll let you finish your point.
I think the thinking is to try to offset that, but that question, that response from you, in fact, is about the question I want to ask, which is that, does it deal with that guilt? Is it enough? Do we need more? What do we need it for?
Okay, so let's use some numbers to put this into perspective. The rich countries have spent $19 trillion. The poor countries had debt of $1 trillion to service over this period of time. The so-called debt service suspension initiative, that's what it was called, the DSSI, an innovative invention, but was only eligible for the poorest countries. And the people who've accessed this have accessed about $5.5 billion. So $5.5 billion out of a need of $1 trillion.
That is very small.
So that is a few drops, maybe 5 drops in a very large ocean. And nowhere near the $19 trillion that other people have been spending. In terms of the other thing you mentioned, which is called the SDRs, it's complicated, and I think you gave a brilliant description of a very complicated thing. It's not entirely zero, the cost of the funding, but it's as close to zero as you can get. It's 0.05% at the moment. Yes, that's been a good initiative, but the amount that they allocate to every country is based on the size of the countries.
Yes.
And so the biggest, richest countries got the most. And in fact, the last time they did this, in 2009, about 60% of it, so they're giving essentially free money, as you said, 60% of it was unused because it went to countries that didn't need it. So I think that what we're trying to argue in the Development Committee, and we have a meeting, in fact, on Friday as a sort of precursor to other discussions, is that we need to say to the people who don't need it, why don't you put this money into a trust which will give it to countries who do? Now, and they've already got some of these trusts, and they're saying, yes, we might do $50 billion. So in a world that needs 19 trillion, 50 billion. It's better than 5. We're getting there. We've gone from 5 to 50, but really we need something that's more like $500 billion. Now, I think the other big point to make, Bo, is that is eligibility. We need to rethink eligibility. So eligibility for concessionary funding. If you speak to people and say poor people need to have more access to cheaper funds, everyone will sit around the table and agree to you. But their eligibility is countries that have an income per head of less than $2,000.
Yes.
It is a very, there was a great study done the other day. 75% of the world's poor people do not live in the poorest countries. 75% of the world's poor do not live in those countries where the income per head is less than 2,000. So are we trying to help poor people, or are we trying to help the poorest countries In helping the poorest countries, we're not actually impacting the world's poor. And so we need a different kind of eligibility. The other thing is, how does past GDP, and we have, we're not very good at measuring GDP. GDP is a total amount of stuff that's produced every year in a country, and we match it with estimates of the total amount of income and the total amount of spending to see if they're about the same. But these estimates are flawed. They're sometimes based on surveys. They're sometimes old. How are they reflective of future risks? Take climate change. Climate change is impacting a set of countries that don't happen to be the world's poorest countries. It's setting a wider range of countries. I call there is a front line in the war on climate change. It lies between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. This is where sea level rising is highest, temperatures are the most intolerable, and those countries, few of them are eligible for concessionary finance because their incomes per head are above 2,000. Yet they are suffering, in some cases, existentialist risks. Some of our friends in the South Pacific are submerging.
Yeah, they are in a lot of trouble.
We have to deal with the sizing of the concession and the eligibility of the concession.
Yeah. In a way, the middle income country trap has become much worse in the post-COVID situation, precisely because of what you say, because the number of poor have simply increased in those countries, and the middle class has, significantly been wiped out.
And it's partly a feature of globalization, Bo. So globalization has converged incomes between countries, but diverged incomes within countries.
Within countries,
so
that is
the number
correct.
of countries are growing faster, but they have an increasing number of people who are... Exactly.
Yes.
So we need to address poverty in a global way, not just by defining it by nations.
Okay, let me talk first of all about Barbados. You're very close to that. You work with the Prime Minister. What is Barbados' situation now? You mentioned something very positive. Basically, the paper that they are offering to international investors and, in a sense, pioneering. But Barbados is in an IMF program. And I read last week where the IMF said that perhaps progress is not being made fast enough in Barbados. What are the challenges that you are facing in that beautiful but small country? And is the IMF being reasonable or applying unreasonable pressure? And what is Barbados seeking to do that it must do at this time amidst all of these challenges?
So lots of questions there. I should begin by saying that my route to becoming the Prime Minister's Special Envoy on finance was via Trinidad. So I say to my Trinidadian friends that all of the women in my life are Trinidadian. My mother, my sister, and one of my dearest friends, Alison Damas, was I think in a flat share with this Barbadian called Mia Motley. We were all 18 years old, 18 years old, in Golders Green in London. And that's how I first came across her, and have been a speechwriter for her for many, many years. The other thing about the IMF, before the IMF, I was actually one of the most reluctant people about going to the IMF within the Barbados economic team. My background is international.
Sure.
I've been an international investment banker at JP Morgan, at Union Bank of Switzerland, and I became an advisor to the G20. I helped rewrite the Basel banking rules. So my experience has been quite mixed with the International Monetary Fund. So I was a bit hesitant. But the experience I learned was that, the IMF themselves have learned that you can't get things done unless the countries own it. And the problem is that countries tend to come to the IMF when they come late, they come reluctantly. It's politically bad news domestically, so they try and delay it as much as possible. And they are completely unprepared. Now, what Mia Motley did, it's the nature of the lady, is 2 years before the election, she created a team and she said, we may well be in government in 2 years' time. The country is in a terrible state. We need to plan our strategy. And so for 2 years, we developed a strategy. Governments don't have time to plan. You only plan in
Yes.
opposition. And if you haven't planned in opposition, you're not going to be very effective in government. So when we arrived, we called up the IMF and we said, we want to see you this week, please. And they said, oh, what's the hurry? Can we come in 3 months? We said, no, we have an economic emergency. We want to address it now and get over it. And they said, okay. And they came down in a week's time and we presented our plan to them. And there was a sort of shocked, stunned silence on their side. And the only words they came up with initially, they mumbled sort of, we think you may be doing too much. And the problem is, so this has very much been our plan. Now, the IMF, quite likes countries doing this. It's great because you get into a program. And once you're in the program, the sort of the walls do seem to come in slightly. And there's a
Yes.
lot of pressure to do things that you may not want to do. And you have to be quite strong in saying, here are the red lines, and be quite open about supporting further research into areas that may be uncomfortable. So I would say, we had a target for a 6% surplus. We achieved that target in an uncharacteristic way in an IMF program, not by cutting benefits. We raised pensions for the poorest people. We raised welfare. We increased spending on the hospital. We reintroduced free tertiary education for everybody, though you may remember that.
Yes. Yes.
And we did all that, and we raised taxes. We raised taxes. We raised land taxes. Land taxes land is very expensive in Barbados, and so we were able to do that. Now, and we were able to run a surplus without a huge amount of difficulty. We restructured our debt, which helped as well. Okay, but then COVID hit, and we are one of the most tourist travel dependent countries in the world, much more so than Trinidad because of your oil and gas element. So our GDP, our national income, contracted by almost 20%, 1/5. At one point, the unemployment rate hit 40%. In the last week of April and May 2020, we had an unemployment rate of probably close to 40%. That's almost 1 in 2 people without a job, without an income. Our social security system, one of the strongest in developing countries, came in, filled the gap, spent 150 million Barbados dollars, that's like 75 million US dollars, on giving people income every week to keep them afloat. So we were able to renegotiate with the IMF that we could no longer hit those surplus targets. Now, you need to be strong with them in terms of what is realistic, what
Yes.
are the targets. The way they close in the room is by saying, yes, you could do that this year. We understand it's a difficult situation this year, but you've got to sort of still hit your debt target in 15 years' time. So you find that you then become self-imposed restrictive. And we've had to argue that it makes no sense facing the world's biggest economic challenge in the last 100 years to try and hit the same debt target that you had before it. So we've pushed that debt target out by 2 years. I would have preferred 3 years or 4 years, and that's provided some ease. So I would say that it is an ongoing persuasion. As I keep on saying to the team, now is the time we can persuade people to give us an ease. There's no point persuading people when COVID is gone and people can't remember it, and that's when they'll apply the pressure. So we have to win all the things we need now, when everyone believes that's the right thing to do, and put ourselves in a good stead in the future. But I would say the lesson I have learnt is that go to the IMF early, but go to the IMF completely prepared with your own plan.
Well, those two things, yes, be prepared and go early. But the third thing that you mentioned is, as a country and with your team, you've got to know what you want and what you stand for. And you have to have the negotiating capacity and the arguments to stand up to them and get them to shift as equals with you rather than being the boss telling you what you need to do. And I think that is a real achievement for the Barbados government. Wouldn't you say?
I think you're right. I mean, I think that one of the things we've seen in negotiating with international organizations, that there's a kind of socialization that takes place. Our officials want to get patted on the back by an international organization rather than their local people.
They want an
So suddenly,
endorsement, yes.
yeah, suddenly they become your toughest. There you are from the government trying to negotiate the thing, and you find your own officials are siding with the international organizations rather than helping you, making the point you want to make. So, yes, you have to be bold and confident.
Yes.
We in the Caribbean used to be bold and confident. We were leaders of the global development movement in the 70s, partly because we got independence early and we were defining our future. I think we've lost some of that boldness and confidence, and that's very important. But you also need to be very clear, as you said, on what it is that you want, where your red lines are. Prime Minister Motley used a very lovely analogy. She said, well, we know we're going on a long march, she said, but before I can get my people to go on a long march, they need to have some breakfast first. and that breakfast meant that we will be increasing the non-contributory pensions, so the people, the poorest people, by 40%, doubling the welfare budget, returning to free tertiary education, spending more money on schools and health. And yes, we will have to raise taxes, and we'd have to cut some spending, and we would have to shrink the size of government, but within an overall mix that was very poor focused and development focused.
Professor Persaud, we've reached the point where we must break for the news, but I want to ask you a big favor if you can do it. I don't know what your time is like. Would you be willing in about 6 minutes or so to join me again for maybe 15 minutes as we go into the second half of the show, because we haven't touched the Caribbean-wide challenges and CARICOM yet, and I wonder if you have the time. Would you give me that time?
I will give you the time, Bo, because it's you. And I want to talk about two things. One, you say the Caribbean, but also on the future and technology, because I think we've had a great discussion about that earlier. I want to talk about that.
Okay, so we'll devote 15 minutes for that. So I'll see you in 6 minutes. Great. Thank you very much.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
Do you want to know how to make money in the comfort of your home? Do you want to know the secret in finding love? Well, you can't get none of that here. Join me on MCTV on To Make Jokes. New guests every week. I'm not promising that. Now take a look at what we have to offer.
Chicken curry, crab curry, shrimps curry.
Yeah, every week, new episode, MCTV.
Wapow! The Big Rich Lime is back. Yes, me, Big Rich, the Pongalunks. I am back on MCTV every week. We go in by the beach, we go in by a river, we go in your backyard, we go in the bush, we go in sightseeing. Big Rich and of course all the top chutney, soca artists, any kind of artist, anybody who is somebody is going to be on the Big Rich Lime every week on MCTV. Big Rich says so. Wapow!
Hi, this is Michael Ruplal, attorney at law. I'm inviting you to join me every Thursday at 5 p.m. on MCTV for the Social Contract. It's a new show where we will be discussing bills that are being debated in Parliament, topical legal issues and recent decisions of our courts, and where we'll be giving general legal advice on issues that affect you, the public. I encourage all of you to continue looking at MCTV, bringing you back to where you belong.
News on MCTV.
This is the 7 a.m. news on MCTV and U975 Hot Like Pepper Radio. I am Andrew Chan. Good morning once again. The Southwest Regional Health Authority cancelled a vaccination drive set for Friday. The drive was organized by UNC Senator Jayanti Lakshmidyal and Councillor for Laserfort West La Romaine Rishi Balram Singh. We go to this report from the 6 p.m. news last night.
A statement from Senator Jayanti Lakshmidyal said based on a request from the Minister of Health and the Southwest Regional Health Authority, the Gulfview Community Centre was identified and selected as a venue, and through the efforts of both the councillor and senator, over 100 persons were given confirmed appointments to receive the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine, and many students had confirmed appointments to receive the Pfizer vaccine. When she spoke with the media, she said she is not sure why the request was denied.
We had several parents who work in and around this area but live further away. And so they said that this location actually was the most suitable for them, that they would be able to get their children here with them, vaccinate them, and then, go to work and that sort of thing. I had a mother from Point Fortin who works in San Fernando saying to me that the only way she would be able to do it is if she came here to get that Pfizer given on that day. That's one thing. The other thing is that a lot of parents are scared. As a parent myself, I could tell you, I'm not taking my child out into a place where they have to line up and wait and that kind of thing, especially a health center.
Senator Lakshmidyal was asked about the noted slowdown in vaccine uptake, but said this was an opportunity to encourage people to take the jab.
Yes, I understand SAPA has slowed down significantly. Maybe it has to do with the brands. There were two brands of vaccines that were being offered here, and that is the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer, for those who qualify for the Pfizer. We had a good response. We had a number of people who, have phobias with needles. So, for example, the Johnson & Johnson is the preferable one for them. It's just one jab and that's it. We had quite a bit of people who did not wish to go to SAPA to take the Sinopharm vaccine for traveling purposes, and they were interested in taking the Johnson & Johnson. We have people who want to travel very soon, and so getting the one jab was a good idea for them.
She said given that these vaccines have an expiry date, she's asking if the government would be able to maximize its use.
Taking into account all those considerations, any opportunity to put a vaccine in someone's arm should be taken, and also to combat the hesitancy and to meet with the population. There are certain religious leaders, for example, who are not encouraging their flock to take the vaccine. Have you heard of any government official, any member of parliament, anyone reaching out to these people and asking them to meet with them and have a conversation with them and try to reason with them and listen to their concerns? No. And that is where the communication strategy of the ministry is falling down.
She said it will be difficult to ask volunteers and others, again, to offer assistance if they are to do this outreach. Efforts to contact the Chief Executive Officer of the SWRHA, Brian Amor, proved futile.
Thank you very much, Rishi Harinanan, for that report. The reopening of schools as planned for students of Forms 4, 5 and 6 will be a nightmare, so warns opposition leader Kamala Persaud-Bissessar. She further criticized the government for shutting down the laptop program under the People's Partnership Administration. Her comments came while speaking at the UNC's virtual report on Monday night.
Let's talk about the nightmare when schools open. You're saying that the vaccinated can go to school for face-to-face interaction with their teachers. You're saying if you're not vaccinated, stay home. But do you remember that over 60,000 children do not have connectivity with Wi-Fi, do not have devices? You stopped the most brilliant program in this time, which was a laptop program for children. You cut it off, put them into lockdown, put them into this situation, and then asking them to log on, go online, learn online.
The opposition leader has advised government to take the funding set aside for school reopenings and use that to purchase devices for students in need.
Why don't you take some of that money and give them the laptops, buy the laptops? For the foreseeable future, it looks as though we have to learn to live with this pandemic. It's not going to go away very soon. We are seeing what's happening in other countries, where you're having wave upon wave. So we have to learn to navigate in these dangerous times and learn to live with what will be with us for some time. So take some money, buy some laptops, have the children prepared to deal with the environment and with the situation in that regard.
39 Venezuelans, 18 men, 9 women, 8 girls and 4 boys were detained on August the 31st for attempting to enter this country illegally. Officers of the Carenage police station received information which led them to Alcan Bay and cruising facility where they observed several persons attempting to enter the compound. When the officers attempted to engage the group, they ran in separate directions, causing a chase to ensue. The 39 persons were detained. The group was processed and a quantity of contraband items consisting of limes, various brands of alcohol, cigarettes and cheese were discovered with them. Quarantine orders were issued and the group was handed over to the Coast Guard at the Chaguaramas heliport base to begin their quarantine. The group is expected to be repatriated to their homeland following inquiries. In some international news now, at least 9 persons have died after flash flooding and tornadoes hit the northeastern United States. The governors of New York and New Jersey declared a state of emergency. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio called it a historic weather event. At least 3 inches of rain fell in just 1 hour in New York Central Park. Almost all of New York City's subway lines have been closed and non-emergency vehicles banned from roads. Many flights and trains out of New York and New Jersey have been suspended. A 2-year-old boy was amongst one of the victims in New York City. Footage on social media showed water pouring into subway stations and persons' homes and flooding roads. The extreme weather has been caused by the tail end of Tropical Storm Ida, which caused widespread devastation in southern Louisiana earlier this week. And that brings us to the end of the 7 a.m. news on MCTV and U975 Hot Like Pepper Radio. I am Andrew Chan. Another newscast comes up at 8 a.m. Here's Dr. Bo once more with your brighter morning.
News on MCTV.
I don't want no drunk fisherman's son for my Indira.
Oh, your backside from here. Remember? And take your son the best of you too.
Beta, a government scholarship? Beta, what kind of ship that is? We go catch plenty fish in it?
Oh, pretty.
My heart's
Easy man wearing pants in the house, eh? It's me! It's me!
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today or visit our website www.lifetimesolutions.tt.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
Welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bo. My name is Bo Tiwari and we're glad to have you. We are on MCTV, Multicultural TV, and U97.5, Hot Like Pepper Radio, Multicultural Radio. We have Professor Persaud on the line and we will continue our discussion with him. Thank you so much for staying. And we're glad to engage the 2 issues. The first thing is the CARICOM report. You took a a cue from Usain Bolt, and you called it Caribbean 9.58, speeding up the Caribbean. And you said many, many interesting things in there, and that report was very well received. Some of the critical things that you mentioned were, what can we do without money? We talk so much about money, but can't we do some things without money? The other thing you mentioned is that we make many decisions, but the decisions are so divorced from the people. Can't we make decisions that directly impact on people at the point at which it can make the highest impact? And the other thing is that we make so many decisions, and some country says that, look, we don't like that decision, we don't want to go along, and everything stalls. And you basically said, well, can't a handful of countries agree to do it and let them go ahead? And if others don't want to go ahead, okay. So talk a little bit about that report and the meaning and significance of it, and what are a couple of things that we can do that would make a decisive difference to CARICOM.
Thank you. I think it was the St. Anne Declaration of 2018 which launched the report. CARICOM appointed a commission, and I was honored to chair it. And when I gathered the commissioners together, one of the things we were really quite anxious about, I mean, let's be frank, when you mention CARICOM to ordinary people, it does not fill them with a great sense of hope and inspiration. Their instinct would be, they're just squabbling, and they can't get anything done, and nothing's happened. A whole set of negative emotions is generally the case. There are some exceptions. And so we didn't want to be part of another grand report, elegantly written perhaps, that is sort of politely applauded, but then goes back on the shelf.
Nothing happens, yes.
That dusty shelf with all the other reports that have been written. My father, who was a noted economist, was part of the last West Indian Commission report. And so we sort of thought, why is CARICOM not achieving these things? And we did a fair bit of research, and we found that actually there's a lot more agreement than people realize. That there are a whole bunch of things that are stuck in CARICOM, not because nobody can agree, but because 12 countries agree, but not 15. Or 14 countries agree, but not 15. And, that there was a vast majority often that would agree, but not everyone does. And, I mean, if you try to run your family where you only did things from complete unanimity, you wouldn't really do very much. So we borrowed something from the Europeans, which is called enhanced cooperation.
Yes.
So if a big minority, say 5 countries is our recommendation, decide to do something, and this something does not harm the other 15, then they can go ahead and do it. And the idea being that many of the reasons why countries don't do things is because of fear and uncertainty. And so we're not trying to fragment CARICOM. We don't think there'll be a whole set of different things being done by different people. We think that getting 5 to start is a way to get all 15 involved. Yes. Because when the 5 start and the other 10 observe that, well, they didn't seem to have a nuclear winter.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. Then the other thing that stops CARICOM is, for which we have a solution, which has a nice technical term of subsidiarity. So the other problem with CARICOM is that you've got people who believe that we must do everything regionally, and there are people who believe that we must do nothing regionally. And really, the right spot is somewhere in between. There are some things best done by countries. There's some things best done by parishes or local communities. Garbage collection is probably best not done by CARICOM. But if you want to reach a route about an agreement on our airspace within the region, Doing it by country doesn't help because planes can just move around your airspace. But if we did it as a region, we could actually charge more for ships and planes traversing our region. And so subsidiarity is the other thing, so that we limit what we do to only things that have to be done at a regional level, and we allow 5 countries to move ahead. And the third thing we found that stopped progress was people fight about money. People fight about money amongst friends, amongst family. People fight about money within countries. And, you began this segment earlier in the morning by talking about Patrick Watson's very interesting ideas. And Patrick talked a lot about some of the long-term things we need to think about. And it's quite right for academics like Patrick to try and remind people about the long term, because people are very obsessed about the short term. But many of the deep long-term things we need to do not cost money. We in Barbados were 129th, place to do business in terms of how easy it is to do business. Trinidad is not far in front of us. I think you guys are around the 110 or so. And making our places easier places to do business has nothing to do with money. It's about protocols and using of technology and thinking about permissions. We found in transforming doing business in Barbados, we found a very useful question to ask public officials is, why would you ever say no? And what we found is half the time they're asking questions, they're going through processes, but they never actually say no. They just take a long time to say yes when they would always have said yes. So we said to them, there are no circumstances in which you say no to this, don't ask a question, just move ahead to the next one.
All right, very good. What do you think will happen to the report now? You think anything? Just a brief response, and we'll go on to the technology side.
Well, I don't really want to. I've learned enough about being in government that I'm quite happy not being in government. I'm quite happy being an advisor, supporting ideas, trying to communicate those ideas, trying to frame those ideas in a way that ordinary people who have little interest in policy and politics and economics can understand what we're trying to do, can grasp it, and contribute their ideas. And I think we've kind of coming to the end of that, and it's up to our politicians to move ahead. Now, let me end, though, by saying on this point that they are looking at legislation on enhanced cooperation where 5 countries can move ahead. They are indeed making progress on a regional movement on telecoms. I'm part of a negotiation with the operators for a regional roaming like home or very inexpensive roaming across the region.
Across the region.
So a number of things are happening. Maybe if we got a third of the things in the report done, I'd be very happy, and I think at the moment there's a chance to get half.
All right, very good. We'll leave on that positive note. But let's focus on the other thing. The final thing I want to discuss with you, where the world is headed. All of us know, in Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, we're talking a lot about digitalization, and an entire ministry has been set up for that. We know that the whole world is going into automation. Artificial intelligence, and these things are really going to drive. Technology is going to drive the world, and knowledge and technology related to knowledge drive the world. Where do we stand as countries in the region on this? What is our best opportunity? And what should we do to make sure that we are not left back in the competitive race that is taking place among the geopolitically strident countries of the world?
It's a very important question, and sometimes it's the nature of humanity that we get excited about new things. If you want to make something popular, just add the word new in front of it. And the people get very excited. But there's a famous economist who specializes in technology issues, who said that the computer revolution can be seen everywhere except in the economic statistics. So we've had a computer revolution since 1970s. We've had the internet since the 1980s. We've had amazing transformations, Internet of Things in the last 10 years. And yet economic growth in the world is not markedly higher. It is actually some of the countries that we consider enviously of being at the forefront, the cutting edge of technology, Estonia, etc., are not growing faster. And that's because they're actually fundamental matters as opposed to there are a lot of fundamentals that matter. And the analogy that I came across, I think, is very powerful, is that, imagine there is a robot who can do everything that I can do. Can appear on talk shows and can write beautifully and can come up with great ideas, can do everything I can do. And all I need to do is pack it off in the morning with a battery pack, maybe, and I could sit back and I could read my favorite book and look at my favorite movies. And I own that robot. It's fantastic. Yeah, my life is better off. But imagine there's this robot now that can do everything I can do, but Microsoft owns that robot. I do not own that robot. Then my life is totally different. It is a much, much, much poorer life. And what is the difference? It's not technology. Technology has not changed in both of those examples. It is ownership. Ownership matters. So our technology strategy has to be focused on how do we own knowledge. How do we have an innovative and a research and development strategy that is about ownership of knowledge and also about ownership of the international firms that are dominating this space. The channels and avenues of economic development are no longer based around seaports and airports. It's based around the airwaves. And those airwaves are being dominated. When revolutions happen, they tend to be very democratic. But over time, the democratic revolution becomes back to some kind of autocratic state. Think of the French Revolution, 1789, very democratic at the beginning. So the internet was a very democratic revolution, and now there are 5 companies that dominate it. Yes. 5 companies that dominate fintech space and dominate the world economy in a way that the 7 sisters in the oil sector never did. Microsoft and Google and Apple and Facebook. And we need to find ways in which we can actually participate in the ownership of those things. Chunks of our social security systems and our unit trusts should be invested in those things. And we need to find ways to make sure that our people have access to them. Because if our people are not setting up stalls on Facebook and Google and Microsoft and Apple, and we don't help them do that, and they're outside the economic system, they're in the periphery, they're in the backwaters, they will remain so. We need to move ourselves to the center. The beauty of the digital revolution is that physical geography no longer matters. We can move ourselves right to the center of the world economy if we want. But if we don't do that actively, we will be on the outer frontiers and the fringes and will remain so, and we will not be poor, we will not be rich. The digital revolution does not guarantee that you do well. There are 2 ends to it. My final point, Bo, there are 2 ends to the gig economy. I once gave the Sir Arthur Lewis lecture.
Yes, yeah.
And I felt that his fascinating idea about the unlimited supply of labor is actually very relevant today, because that's what the gig economy does. The gig economy is Uber, is Airbnb, and in the gig economy, everybody is a taxi driver. Anybody with a car can be a taxi driver. Anybody with a house can be a hotel. And that's fantastic for consumers. It's really, really bad if you're currently a taxi driver or if you're currently a hotel worker. And so there's the poor end of the gig economy and there's the rich end. And we need to move ourselves to the rich end through ownership. We can't just be consumers. We have to be producers and owners.
One final question. Is research at the University of the West Indies too divorced from these kinds of things? They might be valuable in some ways. They might impact on agricultural production. They might be connected to companies around the world by designing robotic systems from them, because I know some of that is going on. But is the research at the university too remote from the cutting edge of today's reality with the control of the airwaves, so to speak?
I'm afraid so. And I don't say that without recognition that none of that is easy to do. But we are, as a region, fairly unique in the developing world by the amount of emphasis we place on education. Our people do not need to know that Sir Arthur Lewis said it, but instinctively they know that money is not the solution to poverty, knowledge is. And that's what he said, that's what he famously said. But our universities, therefore, need to be poles of economic activity and growth. They're not. They're kind of alongside it. They're sort of also happens. And we're thinking one of the things we need to do is we give the university today, having starved them of money for the last 10 years, we're now returning to free tertiary education. We give them, if you like, a block grant of money. And we're thinking that maybe that block grant of money should be linked to their research success. And success in exploiting that research in a ways for regional development, to make them to increase focus. You know, we don't like to think so as human beings, but fiscal incentives matter.
It does matter.
All parents know that too. Financial incentives matter. And so we need to make sure that university... I used to be a governor of the London School of Economics, and we were number one in the world, top 3 in the world in social sciences. We were bottom in the UK in many ways in teaching and pastoral care. Why is that? Because our people didn't care? Well, they weren't graded, they weren't monitored, they weren't paid for any of that stuff. And when we started paying people for being great teachers, we suddenly lifted ourselves up from being the bottom. So I think we need to incentivize a university to make sure some of their rewards are just and given in quantity and size, real grants being given for being effective and innovative in research that can be used for regional development.
Okay, I want to thank you so much, first of all, for being my guest this morning, and secondly, for staying extra time and being so sharp and very pointed, really, in the issues that you focus on and also the solutions that you are prepared to pose and put in the public sphere. I think that is very valuable from someone who comes from an academic tradition in many ways, but who has found himself in a situation where you've basically said to yourself, I have to do something that makes a difference, and I want to make a difference to the region called the Caribbean. And I think it's really, really commendable. We're glad to have you. We hope you'll come on another occasion. And Avinash, I want to thank you very, very much for being my guest this morning.
Thank you very much, Bert.
Good luck.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
All right, we'll take a break now and we go to our next guest, who is Dr. Rishi Bihari, head of the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association, and we will talk to him as soon as we return.